The rejected Omega woke to crying pups outside her door. Alpha King said they were calling her mother. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Mira woke up to the sound of something faintly disturbing. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but as she slowly opened her eyes and listened more closely, she realized it was a series of soft whimpers. She rubbed her tired eyes, groaning softly, her body aching from the cold, damp night she had spent in her small, humble home. She didn't have much, but she was used to it. Mira had long ago accepted her place in the world, a world that had rejected her, called her weak, and left her to fend for herself. She was an Omega, but not the kind of Omega that was loved, cherished, or wanted. Mira was different. Her scent wasn't strong, and she never had that magical aura that all the other Omega women seemed to radiate. She was nothing more than a burden in the eyes of her pack, a forgotten soul in the shadows. As the whimpers continued, she pushed herself off the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. She made her way to the door, her heart racing slightly as she opened it. Outside, to her surprise, there were no wolves, no predators, but instead, a group of small, crying pups. They were scattered across the ground, weak and fragile, trembling in the early morning light. Mira froze for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. These weren't ordinary pups. They were too small to be wolves, but their eyes, glowing with a strange amber hue, felt familiar to her. They were looking directly at her, as if they had been waiting for her. She knelt down, her heart aching as she reached out to gently scoop one of the pups into her arms. It was cold, its tiny body shivering in her grasp. "Where did you come from?" she whispered, confusion flooding her mind. As Mira held the pup, she heard the faintest sound of a voice in her mind, a deep, commanding voice that made her heart skip a beat. "They are calling you, Mother," the voice said. Mira's breath caught in her chest, and she quickly looked around, but there was no one there. No one except the pups and the strange pull in her chest that grew stronger with every moment. She could feel it, the connection, the bond that was forming between her and the pups, even though she had no idea how or why. And then, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see a tall figure emerging from the shadows. The Alpha King himself, a man she had heard stories about but never thought she'd meet. His presence was overwhelming, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the ground. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He took a step forward, his voice low and powerful. "You've done what no one else could," he said. "You've answered their call. These pups, they're mine. And now, they're yours." Mira stood frozen, the pup still trembling in her arms. She didn't understand. The Alpha King, the one who ruled over so many, was standing before her, declaring that the pups were hers. The weight of his words settled into her chest, and for the first time in a long while, Mira felt something stir within her, a sense of purpose, a reason to exist. The Alpha King stepped closer, his gaze softening for the first time. "You are more than just a rejected Omega," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are their mother. You are mine." As Mira stood there, still holding the trembling pup in her arms, her mind raced. The Alpha King, the ruler of all the northern territories, stood just a few steps away from her, his cold, intimidating presence filling the air around them. She had heard stories of him, of his power, of his ruthless reign, but never had she imagined that she would meet him like this. A rejected Omega, a nobody in the grand scheme of things, standing face to face with the Alpha King. "You've done what no one else could," his voice rumbled, sending a chill down her spine. Mira could barely bring herself to speak. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. "These pups, they are mine. And now, they are yours," he continued, his gaze never leaving her. Mira blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "Yours?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Alpha King nodded, stepping closer. His intense, silver eyes seemed to pierce through her very soul. He could see her confusion, her disbelief. She had never imagined a moment like this. You are the only one who can protect them. They've been calling to you for weeks. The bond between you and them is more than just fate. It's destiny. Mira's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at the small pups still huddled on the ground, their eyes wide and filled with trust. They were weak, trembling, but somehow they had found her. I don't understand, Mira said, her voice trembling. I'm just a rejected Omega. I have no pack. I have no strength. I am nothing. The Alpha King took another step closer, his presence overwhelming. His large hand reached out, gently cupping her cheek. You are everything they need, he said softly, his voice surprisingly tender. And you are everything I need. Mira's eyes widened, and she pulled back slightly, stunned by his words. You need me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Alpha King's gaze softened for the briefest moment, but it quickly hardened again. You are destined to be my Luna. These pups are not just any pups. They are the key to breaking the curse that haunts my bloodline. The curse that keeps me bound to a fate I can't escape. Mira's heart raced as she listened to him. She couldn't understand how a simple, rejected Omega like herself could be the answer to anything, let alone to the Alpha King's curse. But why me? She asked, looking up at him in confusion. Why did you come to me? The Alpha King's expression darkened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of pain in his eyes. Because, Mira, he said, his voice low and filled with intensity, the moon has chosen you. These pups, they were meant to find you. And now, you must protect them. You must protect me. Mira stood frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what he was asking. She had always been weak, a nobody, an Omega cast aside by her pack. How could she possibly be the key to anything, let alone to the Alpha King's curse? And yet, as she looked down at the pups, she felt something stir inside of her, a connection that was deeper than anything she had ever known. The bond was real. She could feel it in her very bones. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The Alpha King gave her a small, reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. You don't have to know how. You just have to trust yourself. Mira's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the pups again. They were so small, so fragile, and yet they had called out to her. She didn't understand why, but she knew, deep in her heart, that she couldn't turn her back on them. I will protect them, she said softly, more to herself than to him. The Alpha King nodded. Good, because I can't do this without you. With that, he turned and began to walk away, his presence still commanding, still powerful. Mira stood there for a moment, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She had just made a promise to the Alpha King, a promise that would change everything. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear, her life would never be the same again. As Mira stood there, her hand still pressed to her cheek where the Alpha King had touched her, she felt a strange warmth spread through her. She glanced down at the pups, their small, trembling bodies nestled close together, and for the first time in a long while, Mira felt something other than loneliness. It was as though they had given her a sense of purpose, a reason to exist in a world that had once turned its back on her. She didn't know how to do what the Alpha King had asked of her, but she knew one thing for sure, she would not fail them. Mira gathered the pups into her arms, their tiny bodies comforting her in a way she never thought possible. She walked back into her small home, her steps steady despite the overwhelming weight of everything that had just happened. She was still trying to wrap her mind around the fact that the Alpha King had spoken to her like that. He needed her. She, a rejected Omega, had somehow become the center of his world. But as much as she tried to understand it, the truth remained. She had a connection with these pups, a bond that was undeniable, and she couldn't ignore it. She placed the pups gently on her bed, wrapping them in a soft blanket she had woven herself. As they settled, she let out a deep breath, the weight of her promise to the Alpha King pressing on her chest. She didn't know how she would protect them, how she could possibly help break the curse that had haunted him for so long. But she was going to try. She had to. The sound of howling in the distance caught her attention, and Mira turned toward the window. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the land. She felt something shift inside her, a pull, as if the very air around her was charged with something powerful. She looked down at the pups again, her heart swelling with a newfound determination. I will protect you, she whispered, more to herself than to them. But it felt real, as though the words had a power of their own. The night passed slowly. Mira hardly slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the Alpha King, the curse, and the pups who had called to her in the night. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The next morning, she awoke to the sound of knocking at her door. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed to answer it, half expecting to see the Alpha King standing on the other side. But when she opened the door, it wasn't the Alpha King who greeted her. It was a tall figure in a dark cloak, a man she didn't recognize. His presence was imposing, and there was an air of authority about him, but it wasn't the same as the Alpha King's. "Are you Mira?" the man asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Mira nodded, wary but curious. "Yes, I am. Who are you?" The man's eyes flickered to the pups, still curled up on her bed through the open door, and then back to Mira. "I was sent by the Alpha King," he said. "He has orders for you." Mira's heart raced at the mention of the Alpha King. She stepped aside, allowing the man into her home, and closed the door behind him. "What kind of orders?" she asked, her voice tense with anticipation. The man looked her over carefully before speaking. "The Alpha King wants you to come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There are things that need to be done, and he believes you are the one who can help." Mira swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Help with what?" she asked, unsure if she was ready for whatever came next. "With the pups," the man said. "The Alpha King has plans for them, for all of you." Mira's mind was spinning, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward the man's words. The Alpha King had sent him, and if he believed Mira could help, maybe she was meant to do something far greater than she ever imagined. She looked down at the pups, still sound asleep, and then back at the man standing in her doorway. "Give me a moment," she said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. The man nodded and waited patiently as Mira gathered the pups into her arms, ready to face whatever came next. She knew her life was no longer just hers. The moment she had promised to protect the pups, she had become part of something far bigger than herself. She was no longer a rejected Omega, no longer invisible. She had a destiny, one that she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. With a deep breath, Mira stepped outside, the man leading the way, and she followed, knowing that the journey she was about to undertake would change everything, forever. As Mira followed the mysterious man through the dense forest, her heart raced with anticipation. The morning sun had barely begun to pierce through the thick canopy above, casting long shadows on the ground. She glanced down at the pups nestled in her arms, their tiny forms still asleep, unaware of the strange journey that awaited them. Every step Mira took felt heavier, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She had never imagined that her life would lead her here, to this moment, with the Alpha King's orders in hand, and the future of these pups in her care. The man walking ahead of her was silent, his pace steady and unwavering, but Mira couldn't help but feel the tension radiating from him. He wasn't just any messenger. There was something about him that made her uneasy, something she couldn't place. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking through the thick woods, the man stopped in front of a large clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure, a castle unlike anything Mira had ever seen. The walls were black, carved from dark stone, and the entire structure seemed to loom over them like a shadow. Mira couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and fear as she approached the castle. "This is where the Alpha King resides," the man said, his voice breaking the silence. "You will meet him here." Mira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen the Alpha King only from a distance, his power and presence so overwhelming that it had left her speechless. But now, she was about to face him, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. The man led her through the grand gates of the castle, the cold stone floors echoing with each step. They passed through long hallways, their footsteps reverberating off the high walls, until they reached a large, imposing door at the end of the hall. The man knocked once, and the door swung open with a creak. "Enter," came a deep voice from within. Mira's breath hitched as she stepped into the room. The Alpha King was sitting on a large throne, his eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her. He was even more imposing up close, his tall figure and sharp features commanding respect. His silver eyes locked onto hers, and Mira felt a shiver run down her spine. Mira, he said, his voice low and powerful. You've arrived. Mira bowed her head, unsure of what to say. She had never been in the presence of such power, and she didn't know how to act. Your Majesty, she whispered, her voice trembling. The Alpha King's gaze softened, just for a moment. I've been watching you, Mira, he said, his tone filled with something Mira couldn't quite identify. You have a strength inside of you, a strength that I didn't expect from a rejected Omega. Mira raised her head, surprised by his words. I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty, she said quietly. The Alpha King stood up, his massive form towering over her. He walked slowly toward her, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. The pups you've been caring for, he said, stopping just inches away from her. They are not just any pups. They are the key to breaking the curse that haunts my bloodline. And you, Mira, are the one who can help me do it. Mira's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of the Alpha King's curse, of the terrible beast that lived inside of him, but she never imagined she would be the one to help him break it. But how? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How can I help you? The Alpha King's eyes darkened as he spoke. You are more than just a caretaker, Mira. You are the mother they've been calling for. The bond between you and these pups is stronger than you realize. Mira felt a strange pull in her chest as he spoke. She had felt the bond between her and the pups, but she didn't fully understand it. I don't know what you want me to do, she said, her voice shaking with uncertainty. I'm just a simple Omega. I'm not strong like you. The Alpha King stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and Mira could feel the heat of his touch seeping into her skin. You are stronger than you think, he said softly. You just need to believe in yourself. Mira looked up at him, and for the first time since meeting him, she saw something other than power in his eyes. There was a vulnerability there, a depth of emotion that surprised her. I will help you, Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady with determination. The Alpha King smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his expression. Good, he said, because together we will break this curse. And together we will build a future for these pups. Mira nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a place in it. She wasn't just a rejected Omega anymore. She was something more, something that could change the fate of the Alpha King, the pups, and perhaps even herself. As Mira followed the mysterious man through the dense forest, her heart raced with anticipation. The morning sun had barely begun to pierce through the thick canopy above, casting long shadows on the ground. She glanced down at the pups nestled in her arms, their tiny forms still asleep, unaware of the strange journey that awaited them. Every step Mira took felt heavier, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She had never imagined that her life would lead her here, to this moment, with the Alpha King's orders in hand, and the future of these pups in her care. The man walking ahead of her was silent, his pace steady and unwavering, but Mira couldn't help but feel the tension radiating from him. He wasn't just any messenger. There was something about him that made her uneasy, something she couldn't place. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking through the thick woods, the man stopped in front of a large clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure, a castle unlike anything Mira had ever seen. The walls were black, carved from dark stone, and the entire structure seemed to loom over them like a shadow. Mira couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and fear as she approached the castle. This is where the Alpha King resides, the man said, his voice breaking the silence. You will meet him here. Mira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen the Alpha King only from a distance, his power and presence so overwhelming that it had left her speechless. But now, she was about to face him, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. The man led her through the grand gates of the castle, the cold stone floors echoing with each step. They passed through long hallways, their footsteps reverberating off the high walls, until they reached a large, imposing door at the end of the hall. The man knocked once, and the door swung open with a creak. Enter, came a deep voice from within. Mira's breath hitched as she stepped into the room. The Alpha King was sitting on a large throne, his eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her. He was even more imposing. Up close, his tall figure and sharp features commanding respect. His silver eyes locked onto hers, and Mira felt a shiver run down her spine. "Mira," he said, his voice low and powerful. "You've arrived." Mira bowed her head, unsure of what to say. She had never been in the presence of such power, and she didn't know how to act. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice trembling. The Alpha King's gaze softened, just for a moment. "I've been watching you, Mira," he said, his tone filled with something Mira couldn't quite identify. "You have a strength inside of you, a strength that I didn't expect from a rejected Omega." Mira raised her head, surprised by his words. "I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty," she said quietly. The Alpha King stood up, his massive form towering over her. He walked slowly toward her, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. "The pups you've been caring for," he said, stopping just inches away from her. "They are not just any pups. They are the key to breaking the curse that haunts my bloodline. And you, Mira, are the one who can help me do it." Mira's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of the Alpha King's curse, of the terrible beast that lived inside of him, but she never imagined she would be the one to help him break it. "But how?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can I help you?" The Alpha King's eyes darkened as he spoke. "You are more than just a caretaker, Mira. You are the mother they've been calling for. The bond between you and these pups is stronger than you realize." Mira felt a strange pull in her chest as he spoke. She had felt the bond between her and the pups, but she didn't fully understand it. "I don't know what you want me to do," she said, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "I'm just a simple Omega. I'm not strong like you." The Alpha King stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and Mira could feel the heat of his touch seeping into her skin. "You are stronger than you think," he said softly. "You just need to believe in yourself." Mira looked up at him, and for the first time since meeting him, she saw something other than power in his eyes. There was a vulnerability there, a depth of emotion that surprised her. "I will help you, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady with determination. The Alpha King smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his expression. "Good," he said, "because together we will break this curse. And together we will build a future for these pups." Mira nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a place in it. She wasn't just a rejected Omega anymore. She was something more. Something that could change the fate of the Alpha King, the pups, and perhaps even herself. As Mira stood in the grand hall of the Alpha King's castle, her heart raced with uncertainty. She had barely begun to understand her role in this twisted fate, but the more she tried to push the overwhelming thoughts away, the more they returned with a force she couldn't ignore. The Alpha King's words lingered in her mind. Together, we will break this curse. She had promised him her help, but the weight of that promise felt heavier than ever. Mira stood at the edge of the grand room, watching the Alpha King move with powerful, graceful strides toward the window. His tall figure seemed to fill the entire space, the air around him charged with a silent energy that Mira could feel from where she stood. She couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something about him, something more than just his power, that made her feel both drawn to him and terrified of him at the same time. "Mira," he said, his voice breaking through her thoughts, "come here." Mira hesitated for a moment, her body frozen in place, but then she forced herself to move, her feet carrying her closer to him. As she approached, the air around her seemed to grow colder, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had never been in such close proximity to someone with so much power. She had been nothing but an Omega, a mere afterthought in the world of the Alphas, but now she was standing beside the very Alpha King. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. "You've proven yourself to me already," the Alpha King continued, his eyes never leaving her as he spoke. "You have something inside you, something more than just the bond you share with the pups. You have strength, and I need you to realize that. For all of us." Mira swallowed, her throat dry. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "I don't have the strength you think I do. I've always been weak." The Alpha King's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, Mira saw something other than cold authority in his eyes. "You're not weak," he said, his voice low and steady. "You just need to see yourself for what you truly are." Mira shook her head. She couldn't see herself that way. She had spent her entire life being told that she wasn't enough, that she was nothing but a burden. "I'm just an Omega," she whispered. "Just someone who was never meant to have a place in this world." The Alpha King stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. His hand reached out, gently cupping her chin, and for a moment, Mira was paralyzed by the intensity of his touch. She could feel the heat from his palm, the strength in his fingers, and the way he held her gaze with an unspoken command. "No, Mira," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You are more than that, and I will show you." Before she could respond, he released her chin and turned toward the door. "Come with me," he said, gesturing for her to follow. Mira hesitated again, but then, with a deep breath, she took a step forward. She was no longer just a passive bystander in her own life. She had made a choice, and it was time to see it through. She followed the Alpha King down the long corridors of the castle, the sounds of their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. She had no idea where he was taking her, but she trusted him. Strangely, she trusted him more than she had ever trusted anyone. The journey took them to a massive chamber at the heart of the castle. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries, and the floor was covered in a plush, red carpet. At the center of the room stood a large stone altar, and around it, a circle of candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Mira's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. This was no ordinary room. It felt ancient, sacred. "This is where it will begin," the Alpha King said, his voice solemn. "The curse that has bound my bloodline for generations. This is where it ends." Mira looked at him, confusion and fear mixing in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Alpha King's gaze hardened, and he stepped toward the altar. "The curse," he said again, his voice growing darker. "It is bound to me, to my family. But there is a way to break it, a way to free myself, to free all of us. And that way lies with you." Mira's heart skipped a beat as he turned back to her. "You are the key, Mira. The bond between you and the pups. It's not just a connection. It's the power we need to destroy the curse. You are the one who can set us free." Mira's mind raced as the Alpha King's words settled in her thoughts. She had been chosen. She had no idea why, but she had been. She was no longer just a rejected Omega. She had a purpose, and it was tied to the Alpha King, to the pups, and to the curse that had haunted them for so long. "I will do whatever it takes," Mira said, her voice stronger now. "I will help you break this curse." The Alpha King nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I knew you would," he said. "Together, we will change everything." As Mira stood beside the Alpha King, her heart raced with anticipation. She had promised to help break the curse that had haunted his bloodline for generations, but she had no idea what the next steps would be. Everything had happened so fast, and the weight of it all seemed almost too much to bear. The Alpha King had made it clear that the fate of not only his pack, but of their entire world rested on her shoulders. "Are you ready?" The Alpha King's voice broke through her thoughts, his silver eyes watching her carefully. Mira nodded, though a part of her still felt uncertain. "I have to be," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The Alpha King gave her a small, approving nod. "Good. We will begin the ceremony now." He turned toward the center of the room, where the stone altar stood, surrounded by flickering candles. Mira followed him, her feet moving almost on their own accord as her mind struggled to comprehend the significance of this moment. She had never been part of anything so monumental in her life, and now, standing here, it felt like she was on the brink of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. The room was eerily silent, save for the soft crackling of the candles as the Alpha King began to chant in a language Mira didn't recognize. His voice was low and powerful, carrying with it an ancient strength that resonated deep within her chest. Mira stood just behind him, her eyes fixed on the altar as she tried to focus on the task ahead. The pups, still in her arms, stirred restlessly, their tiny bodies shifting as they sensed the power in the air. Mira instinctively tightened her grip on them, comforting them with soft whispers. "You're safe," she murmured. "I won't let anything happen to you." The Alpha King's chant grew louder, his words echoing off the walls of the room. Mira could feel the air around her begin to shift, a strange energy swirling in the space, pulling at her very being. It was as if the room itself was alive, vibrating with a power she couldn't explain. "Mira," the Alpha King said suddenly, his voice breaking the trance-like state she had fallen into. Place the pups on the altar. Mira blinked, momentarily disoriented, but then she nodded. Gently, she placed the pups on the cold stone altar, their small bodies now lying in a perfect circle. As she did, she felt a rush of warmth spread through her chest, as if the bond between her and the pups had deepened even further. The Alpha King stepped forward, his hands raised toward the ceiling as he continued his chant, his voice now resonating with even greater power. Mira stood back, watching in awe as the ritual unfolded before her. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the very air crackling as the Alpha King's magic took hold. Mira could feel the weight of his power, the ancient magic flowing through him like a river, its currents tugging at her own soul. She was more connected to this than she had ever realized. The Alpha King's eyes closed as he spoke the final words of the chant, his voice a deep, resonant hum that filled the room. For a moment, everything went still. The candles flickered, and the energy in the room seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, with a sudden flash of light, the room erupted in a brilliant, blinding glow. Mira staggered back, shielding her eyes from the intensity of the light. She could hear the pups whimpering on the altar, their tiny cries echoing in the sudden stillness. As the light faded, Mira opened her eyes, and what she saw made her gasp in awe. The pups were no longer just small creatures. Their forms had shifted, their bodies glowing with a soft, ethereal light. They were transforming before her eyes, their true power awakening. The Alpha King stood tall, his eyes filled with a fierce, unyielding intensity. He turned toward Mira, his expression filled with a mix of pride and determination. "It is done," he said, his voice filled with quiet triumph. Mira could hardly believe what had just happened. The pups, now transformed, were no longer just innocent creatures. They were something more, something ancient. Their power had awakened, and it was all because of her. The Alpha King's curse was not only broken, it had been replaced with a new future, a future where Mira had a place in this world, a place she had never thought possible. "You did it," the Alpha King said, his voice softer now. "You've set us free." Mira looked down at the pups, their eyes glowing with the same power that now radiated from the Alpha King. She had never felt so connected to something, so integral to something greater than herself. She had come here as a rejected Omega, but now, she was something more, something powerful, something destined to change the course of history. The Alpha King stepped forward, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You are my Luna," he said, his voice filled with deep reverence. "And together, we will rebuild everything." Mira's heart swelled with a mix of emotions, joy, fear, uncertainty, but one thing was clear. She was no longer alone, and she was no longer invisible. She had found her place, and the future that once seemed so uncertain now lay before her, full of promise. The days that followed were a blur of new beginnings and overwhelming responsibilities for Mira. The Alpha King, Darius, had made it clear that the future of his kingdom, and her own future, depended on their ability to come together. Mira had never been part of something so powerful, so monumental, and she found herself struggling to adjust. She had always lived in the shadows, unnoticed by those around her. But now, she was standing in the light, by the side of a man who commanded respect from all who knew him. Her life had shifted in ways she could not have imagined. At first, the palace felt like a strange, foreign place. Mira had spent so much of her life in the small, humble home she had built, and now she was surrounded by opulence she had never dreamed of. The stone walls of the castle seemed to pulse with power, and the weight of the history that filled each room left her breathless. But despite the beauty of the place, Mira felt a sense of unease. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this new life, for the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. She had never thought of herself as a leader or someone worthy of attention. Yet here she was, by the Alpha King's side, with the pups, the future of their world, depending on her. Mira knew she had to rise to the challenge, but it was easier said than done. Every time she looked at Darius, she saw the strength in his eyes, the years of battle and leadership that had shaped him into the powerful man he was. She wondered if she would ever be able to live up to the expectations he had for her. "You're doing well," Darius said one evening as they sat together in the grand hall. Mira looked up at him, surprised by his words. She had been so focused on the weight of her responsibilities that she hadn't noticed how much she had already grown into her role. "You've come a long way since the first day we met," he continued, his voice soft, almost comforting. "You're more than just an Omega. You are my Luna." Mira felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but doubts still lingered in the back of her mind. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just me. I'm not strong like you." Darius reached out, gently cupping her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady, and Mira felt a sense of peace wash over her. "You are stronger than you think," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "You've already proven that. You have more strength in your heart than you realize. You were chosen for a reason, Mira, not just because of your bond with the pups, but because you have the heart of a leader." Mira looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was unwavering faith. He truly believed in her, and for the first time, Mira started to believe in herself. "I will try," she said, her voice steady. "I will be the Luna you need me to be." Darius smiled, a rare and genuine smile that made his eyes soften. "That's all I ask," he said. "Together, we can change everything." Over the next few weeks, Mira immersed herself in her new role. She worked alongside Darius, learning the intricacies of leadership, the responsibilities of being a Luna, and the weight of guiding a kingdom. It wasn't easy, but with Darius by her side, she began to find her footing. She still struggled with self-doubt, but with each passing day, she grew stronger. The bond she shared with the pups deepened as well. Mira spent every moment she could with them, nurturing them, watching them grow, and feeling a sense of pride that she had never known before. They were not just her responsibility. They were her family, and she would protect them with everything she had. One day, while Mira was walking through the gardens with the pups in her arms, she felt a sudden shift in the air. The breeze picked up, and the temperature seemed to drop just slightly. She looked up and saw Darius approaching, his expression serious. "Mira," he said, his voice low, "there's something you need to know." Mira's heart skipped a beat as she walked toward him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tense with anticipation. Darius looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. "There are those who still doubt your place as Luna," he said. "There are enemies within my own ranks who don't believe you are the one to stand by my side. They fear what you represent, and they will stop at nothing to see you fall." Mira felt a chill run down her spine. She had known that there would be challenges, but she hadn't realized how deep the opposition would run. "But I won't let them win," Darius said, his voice firm. "You are my Luna, and I will protect you. Together, we are unstoppable." Mira felt a surge of gratitude and determination rise within her. She had come so far, and she wasn't about to let anyone tear her down now. "I won't let them win either," she said, her voice steady. "I am your Luna, and I will fight for our future." Darius smiled, his pride in her evident. "I knew you were the one," he said. "Together, we will protect this kingdom, and together, we will break the curse." Mira stood tall beside him, her heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She had found her place, not just by his side, but as a leader in her own right. The path ahead was uncertain, but with Darius and the pups by her side, she knew she could face anything that came her way. As the days passed, Mira's confidence continued to grow. The weight of the crown she had inherited, not by birth but by destiny, felt lighter with every step she took beside Darius. Together, they worked tirelessly, rebuilding what had been lost and creating something new. The once feared curse that had haunted his bloodline was now nothing more than a distant memory, fading into the past like an old nightmare. Yet, despite the progress they had made, there were still whispers, still doubts from those who had never believed in her. But Mira, once a rejected Omega, now stood tall as the Luna of the Northern Kingdom, and with each passing day, she proved to herself, and to them, that she was worthy of the title. The pups, no longer small and fragile, had grown stronger under her care. Their powers, unlocked by the bond she shared with them, had become a beacon of hope for the kingdom. She had become not only their mother but a protector, a fierce leader who would stop at nothing to ensure their safety and the kingdom's prosperity. The Alpha King, Darius, was her partner in every sense of the word. His unwavering support and belief in her had been the catalyst for her transformation. She had once feared that she would never be good enough, that her past would always define her. But now she knew better. Her past had shaped her, but it did not control her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Mira stood with Darius on the balcony of the castle, looking out over the lands they had worked so hard to reclaim. The air was crisp, the breeze carrying with it the scent of the coming winter, but Mira felt a warmth in her heart that nothing could extinguish. "Look how far we've come," Darius said, his voice low and full of pride as he stood beside her. Mira turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. "We did this together," she replied, her voice steady. "But it wouldn't have been possible without you." Darius smiled, his silver eyes gleaming in the fading light. "You were always meant for this, Mira. I just helped you see it." Mira shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I never would have believed it before," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I never would have believed that I could be something more than what they said I was." "You are more," Darius said, his voice firm with conviction. "You always have been." Mira looked out over the land again, her eyes scanning the horizon. The kingdom was flourishing, the pups were thriving, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly at home. She had found her place, not just by Darius's side, but within herself. "We have so much to look forward to," she said, her voice filled with hope. "Together, we can build a future unlike any the world has ever seen." Darius stepped closer to her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We already have," he said, his voice soft but filled with certainty. "The future is ours." As they stood there, side by side, the world around them seemed to stand still, as if acknowledging the unbreakable bond they had forged. Mira had come a long way from the rejected Omega she had once been. Now, she was the Luna of the Northern Kingdom, a queen in her own right, and the future had never looked brighter. With Darius by her side, and the pups growing stronger every day, Mira knew that they could face anything that came their way. Together they were unstoppable. The kingdom, their family, their love, it was all they needed to conquer whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey had been long, but it had led them to this moment, and Mira couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. She had found her place, and she had found her purpose. She was no longer invisible, no longer weak. She was Mira, the Luna, and she was ready to take on the world. "We are ready," she whispered, her eyes shining with unspoken promises. And with that, she turned to face the future, her heart full of the strength she had once thought was impossible to find. In this captivating werewolf tale, Mira, a rejected Omega, embarks on an extraordinary journey that transforms her from an overlooked outsider into a powerful Luna. In a world ruled by werewolves, Mira had always been seen as weak and unworthy, but when fate calls, she finds herself standing alongside the Alpha King, Darius, with a destiny that will change the course of their kingdom. As Mira discovers her true strength, she is faced with the challenge of breaking a curse that has plagued Darius' bloodline for generations. With the werewolf pups, she cares for playing a pivotal role in this mystical transformation. Mira must rise to the occasion, embracing her power and the responsibility that comes with it. Along the way, she learns what it means to be a Luna, not just by title, but by heart. The bond she shares with Darius and the pups is undeniable, and together, they fight to protect their future in a world filled with magic, power, and danger. This werewolf romance shows how the right connection can turn the tides of fate. As Mira discovers that she is more than just a rejected Omega, she is the key to a brighter future for her pack and the werewolves around her. As Mira's journey unfolds, she learns that sometimes the greatest strength comes from within, and with her love for Darius and her bond with the werewolf pups, nothing is impossible. This werewolf love story proves that even the most unexpected heroes can rise up to claim their destiny.